Marcus Williams, just 20 years old, never imagined he would find himself standing in a courtroom, accused of armed robbery and assaulting a police officer. A bright college student with dreams of a future in law, Marcus had always been the type to fight for what's right. But now he was fighting for his freedom. The charges were serious. He had allegedly stolen a gun, used it in a robbery, and even attacked Officer Brian Harris during an altercation. It seemed like a cut-and-dried case, the kind that would end in a swift conviction. But for Marcus, this was no ordinary trial. His heart pounded in his chest, but he stood tall, determined not to let the weight of the situation crush him. He knew that the truth was on his side, and he would not allow himself to be silenced. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Marcus walked to the defendant's table. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as the prosecutor, Lori Jackson, watched him from the other side. Her confident smirk made it clear she expected an easy win. Judge Maria Green, known for her stern rulings, glanced over her glasses at Marcus and sneered. She didn't believe for a second that a young man like him could have the knowledge to defend himself. But Marcus had spent years studying law on his own, learning from his mother, a paralegal who worked long hours, sharing stories of corruption in the system. By the age of 14, Marcus could dissect legal arguments with ease. With every step he took toward the front of the room, Marcus knew this wasn't just about him. It was about proving to everyone in that room and to himself that the system couldn't crush him. The battle for justice was about to begin, and Marcus was ready. As the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence, Judge Maria Green's piercing gaze swept over Marcus. She had seen countless defendants in her career, but never one so young, so seemingly out of his depth. With a slight tilt of her head and a condescending smile, she spoke, her voice dripping with mockery. "You think you're some kind of legal expert, don't you, Mr. Williams?" she asked, her tone laced with disbelief. "This is a courtroom, not a debate club." The audience let out a few chuckles, and even prosecutor Lori Jackson couldn't suppress a smirk. The air felt thick with judgment, and Marcus could sense that everyone expected him to fail miserably. Marcus stood still, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, unfazed by the ridicule. Inside, his heart raced, but his face remained calm. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, imagining how he would respond to the mockery, to the sneers, to the weight of the room pressing down on him. This wasn't the first time people underestimated him. Growing up, his mother had warned him about the injustices he would face, particularly as a young black man in a system rigged against him, but Marcus was determined not to let that define him. When the judge's eyes narrowed, waiting for him to crumble under pressure, Marcus lifted his chin just slightly, steadying himself. "I may not be a lawyer, Your Honor," he began, his voice unwavering. "But I know what's right, and I will fight for the truth no matter what." With that, the courtroom fell silent. Marcus had taken the first step in a battle that would go far beyond the walls of this courtroom. He wasn't just defending himself, he was standing up for everything he believed in. The real fight was about to begin. The prosecutor, Lori Jackson, stood tall and confident, her polished shoes clicking as she made her way toward the jury box. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, and dripping with certainty. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Marcus Williams, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle," she declared, presenting the evidence in a steady stream. The car, a 2022 Audi A6, was reported stolen just hours before Marcus's arrest. He fled from officers and fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the vehicle. "The case is clear-cut, and we will prove his guilt." Lori's words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, and even Judge Green seemed to nod in agreement, as if the evidence was irrefutable. Marcus could feel the weight of the accusations pressing down on him, but he refused to let it consume him. This was the moment he had been preparing for. As Lori continued her monologue, painting Marcus as a criminal who deserved to be locked away, Marcus remained still, hands in his pockets, his gaze unwavering. The prosecution's case seemed airtight, but Marcus knew something they didn't. When the prosecutor finished, Marcus took a slow step forward, the courtroom now hanging on his every movement. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but strong, "I would like to challenge the validity of this case. I move to dismiss the fingerprints found on the vehicle as evidence." The room fell silent. Judge Green raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. On what grounds? She asked, as Marcus's words caught everyone off guard. I never stole the car, Marcus said simply. The fingerprints on that steering wheel don't mean I committed a crime. They were there because I was near the car, not because I stole it. And the officer who arrested me, Officer Daniel Ruiz, wasn't even in the right place at the right time. The room shifted. The sharp confidence of the prosecution faltered, and for the first time Judge Green looked at Marcus with a flicker of doubt. Marcus had made his first move, and he wasn't backing down. The fight for justice was just beginning. The courtroom was tense as Marcus's words hung in the air, each one chiseling away at the foundation of the prosecution's case. He had already shaken the confidence of the judge, the prosecutor, and even the jury. Yet, Marcus knew that this battle wasn't won just yet. He had a plan, a final revelation that would expose the truth once and for all. Marcus turned to Judge Green, his eyes steady. Your Honor, there's one more piece of evidence I'd like to present, he said, his voice unwavering. The room fell silent as everyone, including the prosecutor, turned their attention to him. I have an official statement from the vehicle's owner, Raymond Whitaker. A flicker of surprise crossed Judge Green's face. She glanced toward the prosecutor, who was now shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he stood firm, knowing this was his moment. He held up the printed statement. Mr. Whitaker confirmed to police that his car was stolen when he left it running outside a gas station. He said someone jumped in and drove off, but it wasn't me. The person he saw was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, and Marcus felt the weight of the truth settle into place. The very report that had been conveniently left out of the prosecution's filings now became the cornerstone of his defense. The air in the courtroom grew thick with disbelief. Lori Jackson was caught off guard. She had based her entire case on Marcus being the thief, but this revelation completely shattered that narrative. The description didn't match Marcus. He was not the person who stole the car. Judge Green, now fully aware of the cracks in the prosecution's case, turned toward Lori Jackson, her expression hardening. The words that followed, "Case dismissed," echoed in Marcus's mind. A sweet victory he never thought would come so soon. In that moment, the fight wasn't just for Marcus's freedom. It was for the truth to be heard, no matter how much it shook the system. Marcus had done it. He had won. The moment of truth had arrived. The courtroom, which had once been filled with skepticism and mockery, was now holding its collective breath. Marcus had exposed the lies, the inconsistencies, and the shortcuts that the prosecution had taken. And now, as the judge's gavel came down, the tension was palpable. Judge Green's words still echoed in Marcus's mind. Case dismissed. For a second, everything was still. The weight of his victory hung in the air, but Marcus didn't feel the rush of triumph he had imagined. He stood there, taking in the atmosphere, watching as the reality of the situation settled in. His victory wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about the system itself. The murmurs from the gallery began to rise. The spectators, who had once written him off, were now buzzing with disbelief and awe. The prosecutor, Lori Jackson, had no words left to say. She was defeated. Her case dismantled piece by the young man she had once thought was just another defendant. Marcus had not only proven his innocence but had exposed the flaws and biases deeply embedded within the system. As Marcus walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the battle he had fought began to sink in. Outside, his mother, Denise, stood waiting. Her face was a mix of relief and pride as she watched her son approach. Without a word, she pulled him into a tight embrace, and for the first time, Marcus let the exhaustion and the stress of the trial wash over him. It was over, but the journey was far from complete. Marcus knew this fight wasn't just his own. It was for anyone who had been wrongly accused, for those who were overlooked by a broken system. His fight for justice was just beginning. As Marcus walked away from the courthouse, he glanced back. He knew that this victory, small as it might seem, had changed something in the world. And when the day came for him to stand as an attorney in that same courtroom, he wouldn't be alone. He would carry the voices of all those who had been silenced, and with that, he would make sure the system was forced to change. As Marcus stood outside the courthouse, the weight of what had just happened settled into him like a heavy, undeniable truth. He had won. The case that once seemed impossible, the one where the system had already decided his fate, had been turned on its head. But as the cameras flashed and reporters rushed to catch his every word, Marcus realized that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about everything he had fought for. His mother, Denise, was waiting for him at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Her arms crossed, her face unreadable. She studied him for a moment before shaking her head and letting out a deep breath. "Boy, you scared me half to death," she said, her voice trembling. Marcus chuckled, scratching the back of his head, feeling the exhaustion of the past few days crash over him. "Had to take a risk, Ma," he replied with a small smile. Her gaze softened, and before he knew it, she pulled him into a tight hug. In that embrace, all the stress, the uncertainty, and the long, sleepless nights seemed to melt away. It wasn't just about the trial. It was about the love, the support, and the unwavering belief that family had in him. It was about the fact that no matter how hard life got, no matter how difficult the journey, his mother was always there. As the crowd of reporters began to disperse, Marcus glanced over at Judge Green, who stood across the street near her car. The judge's posture was different now, no longer the confident figure he had seen in the courtroom, but someone who was clearly reflecting on the case. In that moment, Marcus realized that his victory wasn't just about him. It was a reflection of something much larger. It was a reckoning for the system. He understood now. This victory wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long, but Marcus was ready. He knew that one day he wouldn't be standing in that courtroom as a defendant. He would be the one leading the charge, fighting for those who didn't have the voice to speak for themselves. Marcus had learned that courage, truth, and family could break even the most powerful systems. And when his time came to stand on the other side of the courtroom, he would carry the lessons of his past with him, ensuring that the fight for justice continued. This story wasn't just his, it was for everyone who had been overlooked, ignored, or silenced. And when that next trial came, it wouldn't just be Marcus standing there. It would be all of them. The weeks following Marcus's victory in the courtroom felt surreal. His name was all over the news, his face plastered across headlines as the young man who stood up against an unjust system and won. But as Marcus sat in the quiet of his room, reflecting on what had happened, he realized the true weight of his actions had nothing to do with fame or recognition. It wasn't about winning a case, it was about standing for what was right. Marcus had challenged a system that often punished those who had the least power to fight back. He had shown that with determination, courage, and knowledge, even the most oppressive systems could be questioned. The courtroom had been his battlefield, but the true fight was much bigger than a single case. It was for every person who had been ignored, for every voice that had been silenced by the injustice that surrounded them. When Marcus walked out of the courthouse that day, he didn't just feel the pride of victory. He felt the responsibility that came with it. He knew that this wasn't the end. There were many more like him, people who needed their voices heard, who needed someone to fight for them when the system failed them. Marcus had always been an outsider looking in, but now he realized his role in this system was to change it from within. The lesson Marcus had learned was not just about the law. It was about standing up for truth, about questioning authority, and about having the courage to fight for justice, even when the odds were stacked against you. It was about the power of one voice to challenge the wrongs that have been allowed to persist for far too long. In real life, we all face battles of our own, whether it's in the courtroom, the workplace, or our communities. But like Marcus, we can choose to stand up. We can choose to be the change we wish to see in the world. Justice doesn't come easily, but with the right knowledge, determination, and a belief in what's right, we can fight for a better, fairer future for all.